The carriage wheels groaned as they pressed through the mist-shrouded road, winding like a black ribbon between the sleeping hills of northern Europe. The sky, painted in bruised tones of violet and gray, hung low above the barren trees that clawed toward the heavens like the fingers of the dead. Rain had fallen the night before, leaving the cobbled paths slick and treacherous. Inside the carriage, Lord Theodore Devereux sat alone, the scent of old parchment and damp wood filling his nostrils. He was young, noble-born, and newly wed. A golden ring rested on his gloved hand, the metal still cold despite the warmth of the fire lit and they had departed that morning. His bride, Seraphina of Ravensmoor, had insisted they continue their journey immediately after the wedding, before the fog set in too thick. She sat in the carriage ahead, veiled and silent, accompanied by her elderly maid who rarely spoke and never blinked. Theodore had met Seraphina only a month ago, during a hunting trip that had led him to the quiet, forgotten village of Ravensmoor, a place unmarked on most maps, where even the air seemed reluctant to move. She had appeared in the twilight on the edge of the woods, dressed in mourning black. He had fallen for her instantly, captivated by her ageless beauty, her pale skin like moonlight over ivory, her voice like the hush before a storm. She spoke of poetry and death with equal ease. Her eyes, gray, deep, and unknowable, carried the weight of centuries. She said yes to his proposal in less than a week. But now, as the black spires of Ravensmoor Manor emerged through the mist, a knot tightened in his chest. The mansion loomed atop a ridge, shrouded in ivy and shadow, its windows like hollow eyes staring down at the path. A single bell tolled once in the distance, though no church was in sight. The sound echoed far too long. Theodore leaned forward and called to the driver. "How much farther?" The driver didn't turn. His voice came low and graveled. "We're already there, my lord." The carriage came to a halt in front of a set of iron gates twisted with roses that hadn't bloomed in decades. As Theodore stepped out, he felt the soil shift slightly beneath his boots, as if the earth were sighing in its sleep. Seraphina stood by the gate, her black veil lifted just enough for him to see her smile, ethereal, serene, yet strangely sad. Her maid unlocked the gate with a key that looked older than the manor itself. As they stepped inside the courtyard, Theodore noticed statues lining the path, stone effigies of men in regal garb, their expressions serene, almost lifelike. Too lifelike. He turned to Seraphina. "Who are they?" She paused. The wind whispered through the dry hedges. "Past grooms," she said softly. "Dreamers like you." Before he could question her further, a low groan crept through the earth beneath them. A trick of the wind, he told himself. But the statues, he could have sworn they moved just slightly as if exhaling. That night, the halls of Ravensmoor were lit by dozens of candles, casting flickering shadows along the vast corridors. The rooms smelled of roses and dust. Portraits lined the walls, each depicting men in wedding attire, standing beside the same woman, Seraphina. The paint had not aged. In the dining hall, as the feast was laid before them, Theodore noticed the silverware was tarnished, the wine dark and thick as blood. The servants moved silently, heads always bowed, their faces never visible in full light. The air grew heavy. The flickering candle flames bent strangely, as if bowing to something unseen. Later, in their chamber, Seraphina sat at the edge of the bed, brushing her hair with slow, ritualistic strokes. Theodore watched her in the mirror. "You seem tired," he said. She didn't look at him. "I have known many nights. Tonight is merely one more." Then she turned and offered him a kiss. Her lips were cold. That night, Theodore dreamt of a wedding procession, a line of grooms dressed in century-old garments, marching into a crypt beneath the manor. They carried nooses instead of bouquets. At the end of the procession, Seraphina stood waiting, her dress made of moth wings and bones. When he awoke, the bed was empty. And the mirror? The mirror no longer showed his reflection. The morning after the wedding night arrived without sunlight. Gray clouds hovered low and thick, smothering any notion of time. Ravensmoor Manor remained steeped in a perpetual twilight, as if the sun had forgotten this place altogether. Theodore sat at the edge of the four-poster bed, staring at the cold, vacant spot beside him. The silken sheets bore no indent, no warmth. It was as if Seraphina had never laid there at all. But he remembered the cold kiss. The touch of lips that seemed carved from marble. And the dream? Or was it? He stood and approached the full-length mirror near the fireplace. Its surface was covered in frost, despite no window being open. When he breathed upon it, nothing appeared. No reflection. No breath. Just emptiness. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. It was the maid, the one who never blinked. She handed him a tray of tea and a note sealed in wax bearing the sigil of Ravensmoor, a crescent moon devouring a man's eye. My beloved, come to the East Wing after breakfast. I would show you something of my past. Yes. Theodore barely touched the tea. The porcelain cup trembled in his hand. The shadows in the room seemed deeper now, the air more still. He dressed quickly, donning the same suit he wore at the wedding, which oddly had been cleaned and pressed without a wrinkle, though he had left it crumpled on the chair. He stepped out into the corridor. The manor was different. The tapestries seemed older. The wallpaper peeled in places it hadn't the night before. The candles flickered without wind. And down the hall, a grandfather clock ticked backward. As he walked toward the East Wing, he passed the portrait gallery, a hall he didn't remember seeing before. The door was ajar and an inexplicable pull made him enter. Inside, the gallery stretched far beyond the architecture of the manor should allow. The ceiling was vaulted, the floor cold black marble, and the walls, lined with hundreds of oil portraits, curved inward slightly, like the room was bowing in on itself. And each portrait was of a groom. Different men. Different centuries. But all with the same bride. Seraphina. In one, she stood beside a knight in armor, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, her face unchanged. In another, she posed with a bearded Victorian gentleman, their hands clasped, eyes distant. In yet another, a man dressed in Renaissance garb held a bouquet of black roses, and Seraphina wore a smile of terrible serenity. Theodore stepped closer, his heart pounding. Some of the paint hadn't dried. One portrait in particular caught his eye, it was still unfinished. The face of the man had been sketched only in charcoal, but the eyes were his. Suddenly, all the candles in the gallery extinguished at once. Darkness swallowed the room. Then came the whispers. Dozens of voices. No, hundreds. Whimpering. Sobbing. Pleading. He spun around, heart hammering, but the door had vanished. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in and out. The portraits melted slightly in the corners of his eyes, their faces warping into silent screams. In the pitch dark, he stumbled backward, until his hand touched something warm. Not stone. Not canvas. Flesh. He turned. It was a man. Or what was left of one. Dressed in 18th century attire, but his skin was gray, translucent. His eyes were white as milk, and his mouth was sewn shut with threads of silver. The figure raised a hand slowly and pointed to the unfinished portrait. Theodore felt a force, cold and commanding, push him forward until he stood before the easel. A paintbrush hovered in the air, dipped itself in red paint, and began to complete the face. His face. He screamed. Then, light. The room burst back to normal. The portrait still. The whispers gone. The unfinished painting now blank. As if it had all been a hallucination. But when Theodore touched his cheek, paint smeared onto his fingers. Red. He fled the gallery. The East Wing greeted him with silence. The long corridor stretched before him, lined with dusty mirrors, all of which showed his reflection now, but delayed. Each movement he made appeared a half-second too late, like watching himself in a haunted dream. He reached the end and found Seraphina waiting by a tall, arched window. She turned to him, glowing faintly in the dull light. You found the gallery, she said. Who were they? He demanded. The men. In the portraits. The voices. What is this place? Seraphina approached slowly, her bare feet making no sound on the floor. I told you, she said, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Dreamers. Husbands. Lovers. And soon, memory. Her eyes shimmered not with tears but with something older. Like candlelight seen beneath a frozen lake. I don't understand, Theodore said. His voice cracked. You will, she whispered. Then she pressed her forehead to his. And for a moment the world went black. Images flooded his mind. 1,000 weddings. 1,000 deaths. A night swallowed by a mirror. A scholar who screamed until his throat tore. A sailor dancing in a ballroom made of bones. A priest crucified by candlelight. And always her. Smiling. Waiting. He collapsed to the floor. When he awoke, hours had passed. Perhaps days. He was in a chamber underground. No windows. Only stone. On the walls, mirrors. And in each mirror he saw a different version of himself. Some younger, some older, some screaming. Some weeping. But none free. A voice came from nowhere and everywhere. You are now part of the manor. Part of me. The second wedding is never the last. He awoke on cold stone. No windows. No time. Just the sound of dripping water echoing off damp walls. Theodore sat up slowly, his limbs heavy as lead. Around him, the mirrors remained, each one showing a fractured reality. In one he watched himself scream silently. In another he aged with every blink. In another still he wept blood. They were not reflections. They were versions. He stumbled to his feet, searching for a door. There was none. "Let me out," he shouted, the sound swallowed by the stone. "Seraphina." Nothing. Then from the far corner, a whisper, so soft it might have been the air itself. "You are in the vault of the unwed." He turned. A figure stepped forward, cloaked in shadow, its outline flickering like a dying flame. The air grew colder. It was a man, dressed in rags from another era. A powdered wig askew. His face was gaunt, his skin drawn tightly against his skull. Yet his eyes, they burned. "I was married to her," he said in a hoarse rasp. "In 1742. In this very house. I was the 39th. Theodore's voice trembled. "What is she?" The man chuckled darkly. "A bride. A curse. A hunger that wears white." He gestured toward the mirrors. "Each of us was promised love. Each of us was promised eternity. She kept her promise." The man suddenly convulsed, his mouth tearing open wider than humanly possible. A swarm of moths burst from his throat and scattered into the air, vanishing into the cracks of the stone walls. Theodore backed away, slamming into one of the mirrors. It cracked, but instead of shattering, it bled. Thick, dark crimson oozed from the fissures in the glass. Panic rose in his chest. He turned and ran. A hidden passage opened as he passed, the stone grinding aside to reveal a winding stairwell, descending deep beneath the manor. With no other choice, he plunged downward. The spiral staircase seemed to last forever. The deeper he went, the more the walls pulsed like veins, the bricks slick with something warm. At last he emerged into an underground chapel. Candlelight flickered weakly on ancient pews. At the altar stood a grotesque effigy of a woman, its face carved in perfect likeness to Seraphina, but its eyes were hollow, its mouth stretched into a jagged grin. Etched into the walls were wedding vows, but repeated over and over in dozens of languages from Latin to Old Norse, French, Greek, even languages he didn't recognize. "Till death do us part, till death do us part, till death do us part." But the phrase had been crossed out, scratched into stone again and again, replaced with one line. But death never came. Theodore stumbled closer to the altar. Behind it he found a book bound in skin, a wedding register. He flipped through the brittle pages. Each bore a name, a date, a symbol. Some had faded. Others had been written in blood. Then he saw it. His name. Theodore Laurent. 1888. Number, 200. And beneath it one word, sealed. He tore the page, but the parchment screamed. The sound was inhuman, deafening. The chapel trembled. Candles exploded into showers of sparks. From the shadows, a choir of figures in wedding attire emerged, grooms long dead, their faces decayed, their suits torn, their eyes empty. They began to chant. "She chose you, she wed you, she owns you." Theodore fled again, the voices chasing him through the halls of the dead. He surfaced in the west wing of the manor, one he hadn't seen before. It was dusk now, or perhaps still morning. Time bent in strange ways here. Here the air was thicker, like breathing through oil. The walls were lined not with portraits but with wedding dresses, 200 of them, each worn by a mannequin with a skull beneath its veil. He moved quickly. Past a room filled with broken violins still playing on their own. Past a nursery with cradles that rocked but held no children. Past a music box that spun without ever ending its lullaby, a warped version of the wedding march. At last he reached the bridal chamber. Seraphina was there, brushing her long black hair in the mirror. "You ran," she said, not turning. "You lied," he hissed. "You're not human." She turned, smiling sadly. "No. But I was once." Theodore stood still. "What happened to you?" She rose and approached, each step unnaturally graceful. "Long ago, I was a daughter of a lord betrayed on his wedding day. My love was murdered, and I cursed the altar with my tears. A spirit heard me. A god. Or a demon. It offered me eternity, if I promised to never love again." She touched his cheek. Her hand was cold as death. "But eternity is lonely," she whispered. "So I created my own ceremony. Again and again. They all loved me. Then they feared me. Then they screamed." Theodore stared into her eyes and saw centuries of sorrow. And something else. Possession. "I won't be part of your collection," he growled. Seraphina's smile faded. "You already are." Suddenly the windows shattered. The moon outside turned red. A terrible howling rose from the earth itself. The house reacted, walls bleeding, doors sealing shut, portraits shrieking in their frames. Theodore turned and ran again, this time to the front entrance. But the great doors of Ravensmoor had vanished. Only a mirror remained. In it he saw himself, dressed now in a groom's attire. A crimson rose in his lapel, a silver ring on his finger, and beside him, Seraphina, her smile wide, eternal. The mirror cracked, then he was pulled inside. When he awoke again he was seated at the dining table. The feast was laid, the candles lit, Seraphina beside him. The guests clapped, and from behind veils and masks he recognized some of the faces. They were the men from the portraits, from the mirrors, from the vault. But now, they were alive, or at least pretending. Seraphina lifted her glass. To love eternal, she said. Theodore tried to scream, but found he couldn't. His mouth was sewn shut. The guests applauded louder. And so began the 201st wedding. Autumn 1892. 2 years after the Loron disappearance. The fog hung heavy over the countryside, curling like smoke around gnarled trees. Ravensmoor Manor stood silent atop the cliffside, its tall black spires stabbing into the sky like accusations. No birds nested near it. No animals ventured close. The wind there never sang, only whispered. Mara Everly, a traveling archivist and historian of noble bloodlines, adjusted her coat and stepped out of her carriage. The driver refused to go further. Not a step closer, he warned, his face pale. That house is cursed. She smiled thinly. I study curses. With nothing but a leather satchel and a worn notebook, she made her way toward the manor gates, long rusted, wrapped in vines like veins. She paused as she reached the threshold. Something pulled at her. Not physically but in her thoughts. A pressure behind her eyes. A whisper at the base of her skull. Go back. But Mara Everly was no stranger to haunted places. She had walked crypts beneath cathedrals, touched bones from plague pits, deciphered deathbed confessions soaked in blood. Ravensmoor was just another ruin in her ledger. Or so she thought. The manor's front door stood ajar. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The scent hit her first, wilted roses, mildew, and something metallic. Dust lay thick on every surface, yet the candles on the chandelier still held melted wax, recently melted. A table was set in the dining hall, but the chairs had long since rotted. A music box played softly in the distance, though it was too warped to carry melody. She removed her gloves and opened her notebook. On the first page, Theodore Loron. Missing 1890. Last seen, en route to Ravensmoor. She had followed his letters, charming correspondence filled with admiration for a mysterious bride he met in the countryside. Then silence. She moved deeper into the manor, mapping each hall in her mind, tracing steps with chalk on the floor in case the house shifted. She'd heard stories of homes that bent themselves, protecting secrets like a body guarding a wounded heart. On the second floor she found a bedroom frozen in time. A dress lay on the bed untouched by age. On the wall above it a cracked mirror. And in the mirror, not her reflection but a man. His mouth sewn shut. His eyes full of terror. Theodore, she whispered. He reached toward her from the other side. His hands pounded against the glass. She reached back, fingers trembling. But before she could touch it, the mirror shattered, and all the shards remained suspended in midair, forming a spiral of broken glass. Behind her a voice. You shouldn't be here. She turned to find a maid, impossibly pale, her hands clasped before her. I'm looking for Theodore Loron, Mara said firmly. The maid blinked slowly. There are no guests here. I have his letters. I know he came. There are no guests, the maid repeated. Her mouth stretched into a cruel grin. Only husbands. Mara stepped back. But the floor gave way. She fell, not into darkness but into the past. She hit the ground hard. Grass. Sunlight. Laughter. She looked up. The manor stood before her, new, clean, glorious in its Gothic architecture. The roses bloomed crimson, and the air smelled of honeysuckle. A wedding was in progress. She turned, stunned, as guests in fine 18th century attire passed by, none acknowledging her. A string quartet played. White doves filled the sky. And then she saw her. Seraphina. Radiant. Dressed in white silk. Eyes like obsidian. Smiling. But the man at her side was not Theodore. He was older, wearing a powdered wig and brocade. He looked terrified. As the priest recited vows, Mara felt her skin crawl. She realized, this was one of the first weddings. She was inside a memory, a loop, a trap. The ceremony concluded. The kiss was forced. The guests applauded. And then, the man began to decay. Before their eyes, the groom's skin paled, peeled, and shriveled like paper in flame. The guests didn't flinch. Neither did Seraphina. Mara screamed. And then everything went black again. She woke in a hidden chamber, surrounded by bones. Hundreds of skeletons, stacked, preserved, dressed in remnants of wedding garments. Rings still clung to fingers. All men. All grooms. Etched above the crypt, for those who loved the undying. Footsteps echoed. Seraphina entered, her gown untouched by dust or time. "You shouldn't have come," she said, brushing a hand along a skull. "The house doesn't like strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Mara whispered. "I'm his cousin." For the first time, Seraphina hesitated. "You have his eyes," she murmured. "Soft, kind, hopeful." She approached Mara. "Did you come to free him?" "Yes," Mara said. "You can't." Seraphina's voice cracked. "He is mine now. No one belongs to you." Seraphina's eyes darkened. "You don't understand. I'm cursed to love, to wed, to lose. Again and again. The God who granted me eternity, he twisted it. Every husband withers. Every wedding rots." Mara stepped forward. "Then help me stop it. End it." Seraphina looked at her, lips trembling. "There is a way," she whispered. "But it requires a willing soul, to take my place." "What do you mean?" "One must love me truly, and die in the moment of the kiss. Only then will the cycle break." Mara recoiled. "You're asking for a sacrifice." "No," Seraphina said. "I'm asking for mercy." That night, Mara returned to the chapel beneath the manor, the ancient book still resting on the altar. She turned to the last page and saw something new. Her name. Written in ink that hadn't been there before. She gasped. Suddenly from the shadows, Theodore appeared, half spirit, half flesh. "Leave," he hissed. "She'll bind you too." But it was too late. The mirror behind the altar opened, revealing a glowing corridor of white roses, stretching into eternity. Seraphina stood within it, holding a bouquet, waiting. The mirror bloomed like a wound. Mara stood still, heart thundering, watching Seraphina wait within the glowing corridor of white roses. Her gown shimmered like starlight, yet her eyes, deep, fathomless, hungry, remained fixed on Mara. Behind her, the specter of Theodore Loron bled into the chapel walls, whispering warnings through cracks in stone and mirror. She cannot help what she is. She does not love. She consumes. Mara took one step forward, then another. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world behind her blinked out like a candle smothered by breath. Now she was in Seraphina's world. The corridor twisted, its petals falling like snow. As they walked side by side in silence, Seraphina whispered, "This is the space between heartbeats, between death and dream." The corridor led to a garden where time stood still. In the center, a stone altar wrapped in black vines. On it rested a single artifact, a bone-white mask carved like a bride's face. And beneath it, etched in blood rust, for the hollow god, the truth of Seraphina. Seraphina sat beside the altar, the hem of her gown spilling over roots like water. "I was once a woman," she said almost to herself, "a daughter of House Van Oriel. We lived in the highlands. My father was a cruel man. He offered me to a god of the old forest, hoping for eternal wealth." Her voice trembled. "They called him the Hollow One. He was no god, just a hunger wearing the shape of divinity. When I stood before his altar, he did not take me as a sacrifice." She looked up at Mara, eyes glistening. "He wed me." The silence that followed was colder than the grave. "In return he made me immortal. But I could never bear a child. Never age. Never love again without feeding him." She pointed to the mask. "Each time I wed, the hollow god feasts. He devours the soul of my groom. Every kiss I give him is a death sentence." Mara stared at the mask. "And now you want me to take your place?" Seraphina shook her head. "I want to end him. To break the cycle. But he made me his bride forever. Only one who wears the mask willingly, out of love or mercy, can shatter it." Mara turned away. Her mind swirled. The cost was too high. But then she remembered Theodore, his face behind the mirror, sewn lips, pleading eyes. And all the others, bones beneath the floor, ghosts trapped in the walls. All for a vow twisted by a forgotten god. Mara clenched her fists. There must be another way. Seraphina said nothing. But the mask trembled. The ritual of severance. In the center of the garden, a circle of black stones emerged from the soil. The altar pulsed with unnatural life. And from the trees, figures began to appear, draped in mourning veils, half-decayed, glowing faintly. The former grooms. They came to witness the end. Seraphina began to chant in an ancient tongue, dry and lyrical, like dead leaves brushing bone. Mara stood at the center, and the mask floated toward her, held aloft by invisible hands. "Put it on," Seraphina whispered. "And speak the vow. Lie if you must. The hollow god listens only to love." Mara lifted the mask. It was warm. She placed it over her face. And in that instant, the world broke. The hollow god awakes. The sky above the garden ripped open, revealing an abyss of endless mouths and unblinking eyes. From the roots below, a hand of shadows erupted, huge, skeletal, covered in wedding rings that clinked like wind chimes of bone. The hollow god. He rose, terrible and majestic, a creature made of vows and void, wearing a crown of thorns and veils. He spoke into Mara's mind. "Do you love my bride?" Mara stood firm. Heart calm. She answered, "I do." "Do you take her in life and in death?" "I do." "Will you be hers and hers alone?" "Forever." The hollow god paused. Then he screamed, a sound of breaking mountains, wailing children, dying sons. "You lie." The vines writhed. The altar split. The grooms began to dissolve into ash. Mara tore the mask from her face. And beneath it, a second face, bloodied and broken, grinned with defiance. She held up a small object, the one thing the hollow god had never known, a ring not of devotion but of deceit. An ancient binding ring she had stolen from the chapel's crypt. A relic of betrayal. The symbol of broken oaths. She threw it into the altar's heart. And the hollow god screamed again. This time in agony. The world trembled. The corridor of roses collapsed. The garden burned. And the vines turned to dust. Seraphina knelt, weeping. "You've done it?" Mara collapsed beside her. "Is it over?" "No." Seraphina looked up at the crumbling sky. "Now you must choose." The final choice. In the ruins of the garden, 3 doors opened in the air. One led to the mirror chamber, where the souls could return to the world of the living. One led to oblivion, pure and silent, a place of peace. The last door, unmarked, led to a new vow, a continuation. Seraphina stood. "I can pass on now. But the mask remains. Someone must guard it. Forever." Mara stared at the mask, now cracked, dim but not yet dead. She had broken the cycle but not destroyed the source. She looked at Theodore's spirit, his lips now unstitched. He smiled at her, fading. "I will stay," Mara said. Seraphina touched her cheek. "Thank you." And so, in the final light, as the hollow god's realm folded into itself, Seraphina vanished. Theodore was freed. And Mara became the keeper of the mask. Years passed. The manor in the woods crumbled into ivy and ruin. No carriages climbed the winding roads. No voices echoed in the marble halls. Only crows and wind, and the soft sighs of the forgotten. But behind the hidden corridor of mirrors and thorns, the mask remained. And so did she. Keeper of the vow. Mara had not aged a day. Time did not touch those who made a vow with the hollow god. Even when the god himself had been severed from the world, the remnants of his hunger still lingered in the mask, just enough to bind its keeper in stillness. She tended to the mirror garden like a grave. Not for people but for truths. Each night, she lit candles around the cracked altar. Sometimes the air grew cold. A breath against her cheek. A whisper. A name. She never replied. Her purpose was clear, to watch, to guard, and to ensure the vow would never be spoken again. Until one evening. A sound. Footsteps. Not spirit. Flesh. A young woman entered the ruin above, lost, frightened, drawn to something she couldn't name. She found the mirror corridor. She found the roses. And she found Mara. Reflection. The girl trembled as she stared into Mara's face, beautiful, expressionless, and not quite human anymore. Are you a ghost?" the girl whispered. Mara shook her head. "I'm the last bride," she replied. "But there will be no wedding." The girl looked at the cracked mask on the altar. She reached toward it, drawn by the same force that had called so many before. But Mara moved between them. "Leave it," she said. "You still have time to be free." "But, why are you still here?" Mara looked up, her eyes reflecting 1,000 broken promises. "Because someone must stay behind. Someone must remember. That love, if corrupted, becomes the hungriest thing of all." The girl hesitated. Then quietly she turned and walked back into the world. The roses closed behind her. A silent ending. Mara returned to the altar. She sat beside the mask just as Seraphina once had. She lit a candle. Whispered the names of the grooms she had freed. One by one. Like a prayer. She no longer dreamed. She no longer hoped. But she knew, as long as the mask existed, temptation remained. And so she endured. Somewhere far away, church bells rang. Spring returned. A new era began. No one spoke of the manor anymore. But the earth remembered. And the shadows knew.